polished marble floor reflected the flashing red and blue lights, turning the grand foyer into a chaotic kaleidoscope of justice. Alistair Finch was on his knees, the fine Italian wool of his suit trousers soaking up a puddle of spilled champagne. His manicured hands, cuffed behind his back, strained against the cold steel. Federal agents swarmed his mansion, their black tactical vests a stark contrast to the opulent gold leaf and silk wallpaper. He looked up, his face a mask of disbelief, his mind refusing to process the scene. And there, standing by the grand staircase, was the source of his ruin. It was the waitress, the insignificant woman from that greasy spoon diner he'd torched. She wasn't wearing her stained apron or a cheap polyester uniform. She was dressed in a simple, elegant black dress, her posture radiating an authority that eclipsed every armed agent in the room. She held a set of keys in her hand, dangling them gently. The keys to his mansion, his home. A faint, knowing smile touched her lips as his world shattered into a million pieces. 2 weeks earlier, the bell above the door of the Sunrise Diner had chimed a discordant, angry tune. Alistair Finch entered as if he were conquering a foreign land, his 2 hulking bodyguards flanking him like a pair of trained wolves. The diner was small, humble, filled with the scent of brewing coffee, sizzling bacon, and something warm and sweet, Clara's mother's famous apple pie. Clara Reed wiped down the counter, her movements economical and practiced. She didn't look up immediately, giving the man the same polite moment she gave all her customers. "Just a moment, I'll be right with you," she said, her voice calm and even. "I don't have a moment," Alistair's voice cut through the quiet hum of the diner. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed, slick with arrogance. Clara finally looked at him. She took in the custom-tailored suit, the obscenely expensive watch, the cruel twist of his lips. He was surveying the diner with open contempt, his gaze lingering on the faded photographs of smiling customers on the wall, the slight crack in the red vinyl of a booth seat. "What can I get for you?" Clara asked, her pen poised over her notepad. "An explanation," he sneered, running a finger over the counter and inspecting it for dust. "An explanation for why this relic is still standing. I made your landlord a generous offer." "This diner isn't leased," Clara stated flatly. "I own it, and it's not for sale." Alistair let out a short, humorless laugh. "Everything is for sale, little bird. It's just a matter of finding the right price, or the right motivation." He slid into a booth, his bodyguards remaining standing, their presence sucking the air out of the room. "Bring me a slice of whatever that is," he said, gesturing dismissively toward the pie under the glass dome. "And coffee, black, if you can manage not to burn it." Clara's jaw tightened, but she moved to the pie, her hand steady as she sliced a perfect wedge. This diner was her mother's soul made manifest. Every recipe, every chipped plate, every faded photograph was a piece of her. This man was desecrating a sacred space with his very presence. She placed the plate and a mug of coffee in front of him. He ignored the coffee and stared at the pie. "My mother created that recipe," Clara said softly, a hint of pride in her voice. "It won the state fair 3 years running." Alistair picked up his fork, a silver utensil he'd had one of his men bring in for him, and cut off the smallest tip. He placed it in his mouth, chewed once, thoughtfully, and then his face contorted in disgust. He leaned forward and spat the mouthful of perfectly baked apple and cinnamon onto the clean linoleum floor. "Tastes like poverty," he declared, his voice loud enough for the few other patrons to hear. He then deliberately, slowly, ground the pie into the floor with the heel of his gleaming Italian leather shoe. A smear of brown and gold desecrated the checkered pattern. And desperation. A collective gasp went through the diner. Clara stood frozen, her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of the counter. It felt as if he had spat on her mother's grave. Alistair reached into his pocket, pulled out a crumpled dollar bill, and threw it onto the floor next to the mess he'd made. "For your trouble." He stood up, brushing imaginary dust from his suit. "My final offer for this dump is on the table for 24 hours. After that, the price goes down. Drastically." He turned and swept out of the diner, his bodyguards following in his wake, leaving behind a thick silence and a stain on the floor that felt like a wound. Clara stared at the crushed remains of her mother's legacy. He thought he was looking at a simple waitress. He had no idea who he had just provoked. As she knelt to clean the floor, her eyes weren't filled with tears, but with a cold, calculating fire. While he was preening, she had been observing. She noted the faint trace of blue ink on his right cufflink, a specific, non-commercial blend used for signing bearer bonds. She saw the way his left bodyguard, the larger one, kept unconsciously tapping his jacket, right over the concealed holster of a Sig Sauer P-26, a model favored by private contractors, not common thugs. And when Alistair had made a call just before entering, she'd caught the reflection of his phone in the chrome napkin dispenser. He was using a Cypher X, a military-grade encrypted phone, not the kind of thing a legitimate real estate developer carried. He saw a waitress. She saw a target profile. And the hunt had just begun. Clara Reed was not a waitress. Not really. For 10 years, she had been Analyst Designation Echo for a very quiet, very effective branch of the Treasury Department that didn't officially exist. Her specialty was forensic accounting, but that was like calling a shark a fish. She didn't just follow money. She followed the shadows it cast. She could dismantle a billionaire's empire with a single misplaced decimal point and unravel a cartel's network by tracing the purchase of a specific type of paper. She'd left that life behind 2 years ago, after a case in Bogotá went sideways and cost a good man his life. She'd cashed out, taken her severance, a sum large enough to buy a small island, and disappeared. She'd used a fraction of that money to set up a series of ghost corporations, a web of digital misdirection she'd designed herself. One of those corporations had, 6 months ago, purchased a sprawling, ridiculously opulent mansion on the city's highest hill, a property that had just been leased, long-term, to a man named Alistair Finch. He thought his landlord was a faceless investment firm in the Cayman Islands. In reality, it was the woman he'd just tried to intimidate over a 500-square-foot diner. She ran the diner because it was the last piece of her mother she had left. It was her anchor to a normal life, a life where the biggest crisis was a burnt batch of coffee. Alistair Finch had just threatened to rip that anchor away. He had mistaken her sanctuary for a weakness. He was about to learn it was her fortress. That night, Clara didn't sleep. She sat in her small apartment above the diner, the space Spartan and ruthlessly organized. A laptop, 3 monitors, and a secure satellite uplink were her only companions. The name Alistair Finch yielded nothing on the surface. A few puff pieces about his real estate ventures, a smattering of charity donations. It was a clean, carefully curated facade. So she started digging sideways. She cross-referenced the Cypher X phone's manufacturer with known government contracts. A hit. A cancelled order from a defense logistics company under investigation for bribery. She analyzed the chemical composition of the ink smudge she'd seen on his cufflink, running a spectral analysis from a microscopic photo she'd taken with a pinhole camera disguised as a coat hook by the door. The ink was used by a specific bank in Zurich, known for its discretion. Little threads, insignificant on their own, but Clara knew how to weave threads into a rope. By dawn, she had a rough sketch. Alistair Finch wasn't a developer. He was a launderer, a high-level cleaner for the city's criminal underworld. The properties he developed were just washing machines for dirty money, and he wanted her block, her mother's diner, to build his biggest machine yet. The next day, a lawyer with a face like a clenched fist delivered Alistair's final offer. It was insultingly low. Clara tore the paper in half and handed it back to him without a word. She knew what would come next. Intimidation hadn't worked, so escalation was the only move left on the board for a man like Finch. She spent the afternoon backing up her mother's old recipe books, carefully scanning each handwritten page. She packed a small go-bag with her laptop, hard drives, and a few cherished photographs. She placed the only thing she couldn't bear to lose, a small, slightly scorched photo of her and her mother laughing behind the counter, into her wallet. That night, she didn't stay in her apartment. She sat in her car, parked 2 blocks away, a vantage point that gave her a clear view of the diner. She held a parabolic microphone, listening. At 2:17 a.m., a dark van with no license plates rolled to a stop in the alley behind the diner. 2 men got out. She recognized the larger one as Finch's bodyguard. She heard the quiet shatter of the back window, the slosh of gasoline, and then a whoosh. Flames erupted from the back of the building, orange tongues licking at the night sky. The fire spread with unnatural speed, consuming the faded red booths, the worn counter, the wall of smiling faces. It devoured her mother's legacy in a maelstrom of heat and smoke. Clara didn't cry. She watched, her face illuminated by the destructive glow, and a cold, precise rage settled deep in her bones. This was no longer about protecting a memory. This was about eradication. Alistair Finch hadn't just crossed a line. He had burned the entire map. He had no idea he was now lost in her wilderness, and she was the apex predator. The insurance investigators called it faulty wiring. Clara knew better. In the smouldering ruins, she found the faint, telltale residue of a military-grade accelerant, something that burned too hot and too fast for any normal fire. It was sloppy, arrogant work. Finch didn't think he needed to cover his tracks because he didn't think anyone would dare to look. He had made his move. Now it was her turn. Clara's research had revealed one of Finch's primary laundering methods, a weekly, high-stakes poker game held in the penthouse of one of his downtown properties. It was an invitation-only affair for the city's most powerful and corrupt figures, a place where hundreds of thousands of dollars in dirty cash could change hands in a single night and emerge clean. Getting in was impossible, unless you knew the infrastructure. Clara didn't need an invitation. She needed a uniform. She spent 2 days studying the building's catering service. She learned their delivery schedules, their staff rotations, their security protocols. She identified a new hire, a young woman working as a bartender, and with a few deft keystrokes and a fabricated family emergency sent to her phone from a spoofed number, Clara ensured the woman wouldn't be showing up for her Saturday shift. A forged ID, a crisp white uniform, and a confident walk got Clara past security and into the heart of the beast. The penthouse was a den of smoke, whiskey, and quiet menace. The men at the table weren't just gamblers, they were kingpins, corrupt councilmen, and syndicate bosses. And at the head of the table sat Alistair Finch, holding court like a modern-day emperor. He was on a winning streak, his laughter echoing with the arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable. Clara worked the bar, keeping her head down, her movements fluid and invisible. She served drinks, her ears open, absorbing the undercurrents of power and fear in the room. Her target was the game itself. The dealer was a houseman, his shuffles slick but predictable. But the cards were a fresh deck for every round, brought in by the catering manager. During a brief break, Clara made her move. She accidentally bumped into the manager in the service corridor, spilling a tray of drinks. In the flurry of apologies and frantic cleanup, she swapped the sealed deck of cards he was carrying with an identical one from her pocket. A deck she had spent 6 hours meticulously, microscopically marking. It was an old intelligence trick, a simple but devastatingly effective piece of subterfuge. When the game resumed, Clara watched from the bar. The new deck was in play. Finch, flush with confidence, started betting big. He was getting incredible hands, or so he thought. But Clara's marks, invisible to anyone not looking for them, told a different story. She knew every card before it was dealt. The pot grew to an astronomical sum, well over $1 million in cash and casino chips piled in the center of the table. The final hand came down to Finch and a rival crime boss, a notoriously volatile man named Dmitry Volkov. Finch smiled, a predator's grin. He held a full house, aces over kings, an almost unbeatable hand. He went all in. Volkov hesitated. From her position, Clara could see his cards reflected in the polished surface of a silver ice bucket. He had nothing, a pair of sevens, but she also saw the dealer's hand. The dealer was about to draw 2 cards. Clara knew exactly what they would be. She needed to send a signal. As she walked past the table to collect empty glasses, she let a single ice cube slip from her tongs, landing on the floor next to Volkov's foot. It was a tiny, insignificant event, but as she bent to pick it up, she caught his eye and gave the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. A signal. Trust me. Volkov, a man who survived on instinct, saw something in her eyes, a flicker of certainty. He looked at his pitiful hand, then at the mountain of cash, and then at Finch's smug face. Against all logic, he called the bet, pushing his entire stack forward. The room went silent. Finch laughed. "You're calling with that garbage? Your funeral." The dealer burned a card and turned over the river. A 7, then another. A 4 of a kind. The air crackled. Finch's smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure fury. Volkov stared at the board, then at his hand, a slow, dangerous grin spreading across his face. He'd won. He'd gutted Finch in his own game, in front of everyone who mattered. "Beginner's luck," Finch snarled, his voice tight with rage. Volkov just raked in the chips, his eyes briefly flicking toward the anonymous bartender who was quietly polishing a glass. He didn't know who she was, but he knew he owed her. Alistair Finch had lost more than money. He had lost face. His aura of invincibility was cracked, and as he stormed out of the room, he had no idea that the woman responsible was the same one whose life he had tried to ruin over a piece of pie. The mini-win was satisfying, a quick dose of karma, but Clara knew it was just the opening salvo. To truly destroy him, she needed to get inside his fortress. She needed to get into the mansion she already owned. The mansion was a technological marvel of security. Thermal sensors, pressure plates, biometric scanners on every door. A frontal assault was suicide, but Clara had no intention of a frontal assault. She was the landlord, after all, and she had the original blueprints, not the modified ones Finch's security team had, but the true architectural plans, complete with forgotten details. Her focus was a single room, Finch's study. Her surveillance of his digital footprint told her everything of importance was on a single, air-gapped server in that room, a server protected by a safe that was, by all accounts, impenetrable. The server held his ledger, the digital record of every bribe, every hit, every dirty transaction that constituted his empire. It was the heart of the beast, and she was going to cut it out. The blueprints revealed a forgotten dumbwaiter shaft, sealed behind a wall during a renovation in the 1980s. It ran from the wine cellar directly up to the pantry, adjacent to the study. It was her way in. Dressed in black tactical gear, Clara moved through the woods, bordering the estate under the cover of a moonless night. She bypassed the perimeter fence using a frequency jammer she'd built herself, a device that created a 10-second blind spot in the electronic surveillance. It was just enough time to slip through. She entered the wine cellar through a storm drain access point, a detail so archaic it wasn't even on the security schematics. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and aging wine. She found the wall from the blueprints, a section of old brickwork that looked identical to the rest. Using a diamond-tipped drill, she carefully bored a small hole, inserted a fiber-optic camera, and confirmed the empty shaft behind it. Removing the bricks was slow, silent work. Hours passed as she painstakingly dismantled the wall, placing each brick on a padded blanket to muffle the sound. Finally, she had an opening large enough to squeeze through. The shaft was tight, dark, and thick with cobwebs. Using a climbing harness and rope, she began her ascent, moving inch by silent inch up 3 floors of darkness. She emerged into the pantry, a small room filled with shelves of dry goods. The door to the study was 10 feet away. It was locked with a biometric thumbprint scanner. Child's play. During her time as a bartender, she had lifted Finch's thumbprint from a whiskey glass he'd left behind. Using a gelatin-based compound, she had created a perfect prosthetic replica. She pressed the gelatin thumb to the scanner, a quiet click, and the lock disengaged. She was in. The study was like a tomb, panelled in dark mahogany and smelling of leather and cigar smoke. In the centre stood the safe, a monolithic block of polished steel. Cracking it was the real challenge. It had a multi-stage defense system, a voice print analyzer, a retinal scanner, and a 20-digit keypad. She couldn't bypass them, so she would have to trick them. From a small pouch, she took out a device of her own invention. It was a sophisticated audio spoofer. Over the past week, she had been using long-range microphones to record every word Finch spoke publicly. Her software had analyzed his speech patterns, cadence, and tone, creating a perfect vocal model. She typed a command phrase she'd overheard him use into her wrist-mounted computer. Execute Protocol Omega. She held the spoofer to the safe's microphone. Her computer spoke in Finch's exact voice. Execute Protocol Omega. A green light blinked. Voice print accepted. Next, the retinal scan. This was harder. She couldn't replicate his eye, but she knew from the safe's technical specs that it had a maintenance back door, a diagnostic mode that could be activated by a specific infrared frequency, a flaw she had discovered in a manufacturer's report, buried deep on the dark web. She aimed a small laser emitter at the scanner, pulsing the exact frequency. The retinal scanner whirred, confused by the diagnostic signal, and after a moment, it too disengaged. Only the keypad remained. 20 digits. 1 trillion possible combinations. Brute forcing it was impossible. But men like Finch were creatures of ego and habit. The code wouldn't be random. It would mean something to him. She thought back to everything she had learned. His obsession with control, his arrogance, the date he'd acquired his first property, the serial number of his first offshore account, the birthday of his late father, a man he both hated and emulated. She tried them all. Nothing. Then she stopped, thinking not like an analyst, but like him. What was the one thing he valued above all else? The one thing that defined him? It wasn't money. It was victory. his first major, hostile takeover, the one that made his name. The company was called Vantage Holdings. The date of the final acquisition was June 12, 1998. The final stock price was 85 pesos Ortiz. She keyed in the numbers 061 Luhana more. Only 12 digits. What else? He didn't just buy the company. He destroyed its founder, a man named Robert Carlyle. He drove him to bankruptcy. She did a quick search on her wrist comp. Robert Carlyle had died on October 3rd, 2001. She tried again. 0612221. 301. 20 digits. She held her breath and pressed enter. There was a heavy, satisfying thud as the thick steel bolts retracted. The safe door swung open. Inside was the server, a black, humming box. The digital soul of Alistair Finch. She didn't have time to download the terabytes of data. Instead, she connected a small, powerful device to its primary port. A hard drive cloner. The process would take 17 minutes. 17 minutes where she was completely exposed. Every creak of the old house, every distant siren sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. Her eyes were fixed on the progress bar on her screen, the green line crawling across with agonizing slowness. At 14 minutes, she heard it. Footsteps. Coming down the hall, her heart hammered against her ribs. There was nowhere to hide. The footsteps stopped outside the door. The handle turned. The door swung open, and one of Finch's bodyguards, the massive one from the diner, stepped in. His eyes widened in shock as he saw her. The open safe. The device connected to the server. For a split second, they were both frozen. Then he reached for the gun in his shoulder holster. Clara moved without thinking. She grabbed a heavy crystal decanter from the desk and hurled it at his head. He ducked, and it shattered against the wall behind him. The diversion gave her the opening she needed. She lunged forward, not at him, but at the desk lamp. She ripped the cord from the wall and whipped it at his feet, tangling his legs. He stumbled, giving her another precious second. She didn't run. She attacked. She drove her shoulder into his midsection, using his own momentum to send them both crashing into the heavy mahogany desk. Papers flew. The bodyguard grunted. The wind knocked out of him. He was stronger, but she was faster and more precise. She slammed the heel of her hand into his nose, a blinding jolt of pain that made his eyes water. As he recoiled, she grabbed a thick book from the desk, a first edition of The Art of War, and brought it down hard on the side of his head. He crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Her screen flashed. Cloning complete. She ripped the device from the server, shoved it into her pack, closed the safe door, and scrambled back into the pantry, locking the study door behind her. She didn't have time to re-brick the wall in the cellar. She rappelled down the shaft, sprinted through the wine cellar, and melted back into the night. The heart of Alistair Finch's empire clutched in her hand. The City Hall Charity Gala was the social event of the year, a night where the city's wealthiest citizens gathered to congratulate themselves on their generosity. The highlight of the evening was the presentation of the Philanthropist of the Year award. This year's recipient was Alistair Finch. It was the crowning achievement of his campaign to legitimize himself, to wash his reputation as clean as his money. He stood before the gilded mirror in his private suite, adjusting his bow tie. His reflection showed a man at the absolute peak of his power. The diner was a pile of ash, the land now his. The little waitress had vanished, likely crawling back to whatever hovel she came from. He had won. Utterly. He strode into the grand ballroom like a king returning from a victorious campaign. The city's elite swarmed him, their faces masks of fawning admiration. He shook hands, accepted congratulations, his smile a well-practiced work of art. He felt invincible, immortal. The mayor, a man whose political career Finch owned outright, clapped him on the shoulder. "Alistair, tonight is your night, a testament to all you've done for this city." "I just do what I can, Robert," Finch said, the false humility rolling off his tongue. He took his seat at the head table, basking in the glow of the chandeliers. The evening wore on with speeches and bland food, all a prelude to his moment. Finally, the mayor took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," the mayor boomed, his voice echoing through the cavernous hall, "it is my distinct honor to present the Philanthropist of the Year award to a man whose vision and generosity are reshaping our great city, Mr. Alistair Finch." The room erupted in thunderous applause. Finch rose, buttoning his jacket, the fabric straining slightly over his puffed-out chest. He ascended the stage, shook the mayor's hand with a grip that was just a little too firm, and accepted the heavy crystal award. He turned to face his adoring public, bathed in the warm, validating glow of the spotlights. This was not just an award, it was a coronation. "Thank you, Mayor." "Thank you, everyone," he began, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "When I look out at this city, I don't just see buildings. I see potential. I see a future we can all build together. A future free of urban decay, a future of progress." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, his gaze sweeping across the room with feigned sincerity. Progress, however, is not always easy. Sometimes it requires us to clear away the old, to remove the sentimental relics that hold us back. He gave a small, condescending smirk. Some people cling to the past. They lack vision. They allow nostalgia for a chipped coffee cup or a worn-out counter to stand in the way of prosperity for thousands. But I believe in clearing the path for a brighter tomorrow, no matter what has to be bulldozed. That is my only goal, to serve this community. The applause was deafening, a wave of validation for his cruelty. He was a portrait of civic virtue, a benevolent titan. He had no idea he was standing on a trap door, and Clara was holding the lever. "And now," the mayor announced, beaming, "a short video presentation celebrating the incredible contributions of Mr. Alistair Finch." The lights in the ballroom dimmed. The crowd murmured in anticipation. Finch puffed out his chest, ready to watch his own hagiography. In a small control booth at the back, Clara, disguised as a technician, put on a headset. She heard the director's cue. "Roll tribute VT, on my mark." "Stand by, director," Clara said into her headset, her voice disguised by a digital modulator. "We have a slight signal interference. Rerouting the feed." "What? Rerouting to where?" The director panicked. "To the truth," Clara whispered to herself. She hit a single key. On the massive screens flanking the stage, the slickly produced tribute video flickered and died. It was replaced by a simple, black screen with white text. It was a bank statement, an offshore account in Zurich, a transfer of $5 million to a shell corporation owned by the very mayor who was standing on stage next to Finch. A confused gasp rippled through the audience. The mayor's face went white as a sheet. He took a half-step back from Finch, a sudden chasm opening between them. Finch's smile froze. "What is this? Turn it off!" He hissed into the microphone, which he thought was off. His venomous whisper echoed through the hall. "I said turn it off!" But Clara was just getting started. Her modulated voice, calm and anonymous, filled the ballroom sound system, as cold and clear as a final judgment. Exhibit A. A wire transfer from Alistair Finch to Mayor Robert Thompson for consulting fees. This payment was made one day before the Zoning Commission miraculously approved Finch's downtown tower project, a project which required the demolition of a low-income housing block. The screen changed again, a spreadsheet, a column of names next to a column of figures and dates. It was his ledger. Exhibit B, a partial list of expenditures. Payments to city inspectors to overlook safety violations. Payments to judges for favorable rulings. Payments to... well, you can read the names for yourselves. Panic began to set in. Council members and city officials in the audience began to shrink in their seats, their faces illuminated by the damning evidence. The murmuring grew into a roar. People were standing up, pointing at the screens, their phones out and recording. The illusion of the evening was shattering. The screen changed again. A grainy black and white video appeared. It was security footage from the penthouse poker game. It showed Finch's face, contorted in fury, as Dmitry Volkov raked in the massive pot. Exhibit C, a lesson in hubris, the voiceover continued. Mr. Finch believes himself a master of every game, but when his luck runs out, his temper reveals his true nature, a nature that cannot tolerate losing. Then, the final piece of evidence. A blueprint of the Sunrise Diner appeared, with red arrows indicating points of ignition. And then, an audio file began to play. It was Finch's voice, cold and clear, captured by the microbug she had planted in his study. "I don't care how you do it." His recorded voice snarled, the sound filling every corner of the vast, silent room. "Just burn it. Burn the whole damn thing to the ground. I want nothing left but ashes. Teach that little waitress a lesson." The final words hung in the dead air, an epitaph for his public life. The room erupted. The mayor was backing away from Finch as if he were radioactive. Finch stood frozen in the spotlight, his face a grotesque mask of rage and disbelief. His public coronation had become his public execution. "Lies! It's all fabricated! Deep fakes!" he screamed, but his voice was drowned out by the sound of heavy doors being thrown open at the back of the ballroom. A team of FBI agents, led by a grim-faced special agent, began to file into the room, their movements calm and inexorable. As the agents started their grim march toward the stage, the main lights in the ballroom suddenly cut out, leaving only 2 spotlights active. One remained fixed on the paralyzed, sweating form of Alistair Finch. The other swung across the room and landed on a figure standing near the exit. It was Clara. She had shed her technician's disguise and now wore the simple black dress. The whispers in the room died instantly, replaced by a collective, stunned silence. The sea of tuxedos and evening gowns parted for her as she began to walk toward the stage, her heels clicking with quiet purpose on the marble floor, each step echoing in the tomb-like quiet. Finch stared, his mind finally connecting the woman in the elegant dress with the waitress from the greasy spoon. "You," he breathed, the word a puff of disbelief. "What have you done?" Clara stopped at the foot of the stage, looking up at him, the hunter and the cornered animal. "I simply showed them who you are, Alistair. You were just too arrogant to see who I was." "You're a nobody, a waitress," he spat, his voice cracking with desperation. "How could you do this? How did you get that information?" "You saw a waitress," she said, her voice calm but carrying to every corner of the silent room. "You should have seen the landlord." A flicker of confusion crossed his face. "What are you talking about? The mansion you're living in? The one you lease from a shell corp in the Caymans?" She gave a small, cold smile. "That's my corporation. You've been paying rent to the nobody from the diner for the last 6 months. I've been inside your house a dozen times. I know where you keep your secrets, because I own the walls they're hidden in. Did you ever wonder why the thermostat in your study was always 2 degrees too cold, no matter how you set it? I was calibrating my listening devices. You paid the electricity bill for your own surveillance." The blood drained from Finch's face. He stumbled back a step, his hand gripping the podium for support. He looked out at the sea of faces, once adoring, now staring with cold judgment. He saw Dmitri Volkov near the front, who simply raised his glass in a mock toast. "It wasn't just the house, Alistair," Clara continued, ascending the first step of the stage. "Do you remember the poker game? The one where you lost a fortune and your reputation to Mr. Volkov?" She glanced towards the crime boss. "I was your bartender that night. I served you your whiskey, and I dealt you that losing hand from a marked deck. You were so busy trying to intimidate the room, you never even looked at my face." He was shaking now, his carefully constructed world crumbling with every word she spoke. "You can't prove any of this. It's circumstantial, hearsay." "Oh, but I can," she said, gesturing to the screens that still glowed with his crimes. "And so can he." She nodded toward the lead FBI agent, who had now reached the stage. "I believe Agent Miller has a warrant for your arrest, for racketeering, conspiracy and arson, to start. The data from your server is quite comprehensive." Finch's eyes darted around frantically, searching for an ally, a friendly face, anyone. He saw only disgust and fear. The mayor was already being quietly escorted out a side door by 2 other agents. His empire had evaporated in less than 5 minutes. Suddenly, Dmitri Volkov stood up from his table, a commanding presence in the chaos. "He is a cheat," Volkov said, his voice a low rumble that carried surprising weight. "He cheats at cards. He lies about his business. He is a man with no honor." He looked around at the other powerful, shadowy figures in the room. "After our game, he approached me. He proposed a partnership to solve his problem with the diner property. He suggested a fire would be the cleanest solution. I, of course, have a recording of this conversation for my own protection." He gave a slight bow toward Clara. "And I have already provided it to the proper authorities. He is no longer protected. It was a death sentence, not from the law, but from the world he inhabited. His power, his influence, his network of fear, all gone." The agents ascended the stage. They didn't rush him. They moved with a slow, deliberate certainty that was more terrifying than any violence. "Alistair Finch," Agent Miller said, his voice devoid of emotion, "you are under arrest." As they pulled his arms behind his back, the sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the ballroom's sound system, amplified for all to hear. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Alistair Finch, the philanthropist, the titan of industry, sagged as if his strings had been cut. The fight went out of him, replaced by a hollow, gaping terror. He was led off the stage in disgrace, the flashes of news cameras like a volley of gunfire. As they pushed him through the stunned crowd and out into the cool night air, he saw her one last time. Clara was standing on the curb, away from the clamor. She was not alone. The small business owners he had bullied, the families whose lives he had ruined, stood silently on the sidewalks around her. The baker he forced out, the mechanic whose shop he condemned. A quiet, powerful testament. They shoved him toward an armored vehicle, and for a moment he was right in front of her. His face was a contorted mess of hatred and defeat. "I'll destroy you," he rasped, his voice a pathetic remnant of its former power. "Even from prison, I will find a way to ruin you. I'll burn everything you ever build." Clara didn't flinch. She simply reached into her pocket and pulled out the small, slightly scorched photograph of her and her mother. Laughing behind the counter of the diner, she held it up for him to see. "You already tried," she said, her voice soft but absolute. "You failed. You don't understand, Alistair. You can't burn down an idea. You can't bulldoze a memory. You thought you were destroying a building, but you were just clearing the ground for something new to grow." His eyes met hers across the sea of flashing lights. He saw no hatred in her gaze, no triumph, only a profound and unbreakable strength. He had thought her small, insignificant. He now realized she was the biggest thing in his world, the architect of its end. As the sirens began to wail, pulling him away toward a future of steel bars and regret, Clara Reed carefully placed the photograph back in her pocket. She turned away from the wreckage of his life and looked east toward the first faint hints of dawn breaking over the city. The morning was coming, and she had a diner to rebuild. Not just for her, but for all the people he had tried to erase. A place of warmth and welcome, standing on the ashes of his hate. A landmark of defiance